السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
السلام.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a blessed gathering, and a gathering attended by the angels, inshallah. A gathering that will be a joy for us on the day of judgment, and that we'll be pleased to meet Him with, inshallah. And a gathering that we grow and learn together, and inshallah draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together during these blessed moments in this special place. It's really been an honor to be visiting this community. Actually, my first time in Arizona. I've only connected to the airport before. But alhamdulillah, what a beautiful community, a beautiful masjid, and jazakumullah khairan for your incredible hospitality and the opportunity to be with you during these days. And really, I want us, before we begin, to take a moment to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to take in really what we're going through right now. Sometimes when something becomes habitual, when we get used to it, sometimes a habit can be a very positive thing. It can really repeat, and you go over and over until it takes over your heart, and it enters you, and it encompasses you. And sometimes a habit can be a trap. Sometimes when something becomes habitual, we stop recognizing how special it is. We stop appreciating what a gift it is. Sometimes we start paying attention to it, we just do it. So tonight, we are gathered in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in one of the masajid, one of the places of worship, one of the special places on this earth, to speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to learn about it. I don't think it's an accident that you're here by invitation, because this is an incredible honor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically chose each of us by name and designated that we be in this place. So alhamdulillah for this great blessing and this great honor of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want to remind you, inshallah, at the khutbah during Jum'ah, we mentioned 3 tools that we can use to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll recap them very quickly, and then we'll go into the 4th one tonight, which is living and learning the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone remember the 3 that we mentioned in the khutbah? The first was Al-Quran al-Kareem, which is literally all of it, the literal word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to each of us. And the Quran, of course, is the subject of lectures and discussions on its own, but we spoke about the importance of engaging the Quran individually. Those of us that are able to engage the Arabic, wonderful. This is the original revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those of us that are not, we continue to learn and we engage the meaning through one or even better a collection of translations. We cannot compare the original with the translation, of course, because the original is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, and the translation has a human hand in it. But the meaning is still miraculous. So don't let that be an impediment getting into the Quran, and also look around you for encouragement. I reflect, alhamdulillah, on my own individual journey with the Quran, and I remember, though I was born to parents of Arab descent, I remember attending my first khutbah in an Arab country, and I could not tell you what the topic was. I had no clue. And I remember in Arabic class, my teacher coming up and covering the transliteration in the textbook, because they could see that I couldn't read the Arabic. I was struggling. So the Quran for me was otherworldly. Could never get there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Indeed, we have made the Quran easy to remember. So is there any that will be reminded? So engage the Quran and trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For the rest, upon us is to put in the effort. What was the second tool we used? Yes.
Reflecting on the ayah of Allah.
Reflecting on the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ayat literally means the signs. And these signs are everywhere in creation, especially in nature, in ourselves. Inshallah, we'll talk about this a lot more tomorrow in the ayah. But this is really important, by the way. I'm not anti-technology. Actually, I work in technology. But one of the negative effects of technology is that we become surrounded by the fabrication of man and distant from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the ways that we draw closer to Allah is engaging with His creation. So it's very good to take your children, to take your friends, and go out, on a hike through the canyon, or go to, take it to Sabino, right? Or, the Grand Canyon is legendary on the East Coast. I know 2 people that have been to the Grand Canyon, right? So this is like a big deal. So it's around the corner for you, alhamdulillah. To take advantage of whatever you can near or far to connect with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What was the third tool we mentioned? Dua, yes, is one of the ways to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mentioned it kind of with the Quran, and there's another one too. Our individual experiences. Looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the miracles He works in our own lives and the lives of our family and friends. Tonight, inshallah, we'll reflect on another tool, which is the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's a very famous hadith. Anyone know it? About the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's related by Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu. And he says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in translation that Allah has 99 names, 100 less one. Whoever, and I'm going to use the Arabic, ahsaha, and we'll explain, dakhal al-jannah, enters Jannah. That's it. This is a phenomenal hadith. Whoever ahsa, the 99 names, enters al-jannah, enters heaven. So the Prophet ﷺ made taking a particular behavior with these 99 names a key to entering al-jannah. And we mentioned in Salat al-Isha, we recited the verse in Surah Taha, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa lahu al-asma'ul husna. Allah, there is none worthy of worship except for Him. To Him are al-asma'ul husna, the most perfect, complete, excellent, divine names and attributes. First of all, when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has names, what does this mean? In al-Islam, we are very cautious when we speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because no one has the authority to speak on behalf of Allah except with what Allah has revealed. This is very important. And especially in our times, we engage people of different faith traditions and we respect people's rights to determine their own faith trajectory and their belief system. But many people around us say that they went to sleep and God spoke to them, or God inspired them, or they had an awakening and a rebirth. And the Quran challenges this notion. It actually says it is not befitting for Allah to speak to a human being except by wahy, by revelation, or from behind a hijab, a screen, like the way He spoke to Prophet Musa, or that He would send a messenger, a prophet. Because Allah's not like you and I. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not at our level. He's far above and beyond us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we speak about Him, we speak about Allah with the way He described Himself. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, by the way, we love the Prophet. We honor the Prophet. The Prophet alayhi sallam is the best of humanity. But look what I keep saying. An-Nabi al-Rasul. The Prophet, the Messenger. His honor, His greatness comes from His connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did not invent al-Islam. He came with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Him. So He is a carrier and a vessel for us to engage with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He described Allah in the way that Allah described Himself. One of the ways Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Himself is He gave Himself names. And these names are special and incredible. You know, we have names too, right? But sometimes our names actually are not good descriptions of us. They're not good description of us. Sometimes you have a young man. His name is Kareem. What does Kareem mean? Generous. But subhanAllah, this particular Kareem, he's not generous at all. Just as an example, right? Or sometimes we have different names. Some of our names have meanings. By the way, it's fun to learn our names and our meanings in different languages and so on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His names are descriptive of attributes that belong to Him. So this is one of the ways that Allah's names are special. Allah's names are also really special in another way. Allah's names describe the epitome, the best, the perfection, the height of that attribute. And this is delicate. This is delicate, so focus on this point. Allah is beyond anything we've ever experienced. Allah is special. As we mentioned earlier, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. There is nothing like Him, and He is the all-hearing, all-knowing. In Surah Al-Ikhlas, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. There is none comparable to Him. There is no equal to Him, no associate, no partner, no children. So Allah, actually, in His vastness, in His greatness, no one truly knows Allah except Allah Himself. But that does not mean that we don't know Allah at all. It means that we know Allah at our levels. And Allah's names help to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us at a level that we can understand. I know this is delicate, so let me share an example with you. Let's stick with it, Kareem, right? When we talk about Kareem, a human being, maybe he's generous, maybe he's not. It's a beautiful name. It gives him this descriptor of generosity and something that he would strive for. When we come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah named Himself Al-Kareem. This beginning, this alif lam in the Arabic language, means He is the generous, meaning the definition of generosity, meaning the highest and purest form of generosity, meaning a generosity that cannot be compared to ours. But it means something more. It means close your eyes and imagine the most generous person you ever encountered. I remember, actually, subhanAllah, just to share with you a story, an older gentleman in our community, he passed away actually a couple of months ago. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. He's the most generous man I ever met. And his wife, his whole family. My definition of generosity from my experience. When you would go to their house, they were people of moderate means. They weren't very rich and many children. But when you would go to his house, you would feel that you were a king that has been invited to a palace. They would prepare the best food. And a lot of things you could buy from the store, they would make themselves. So it would be fresh for you. They would eat from the store and they would make it freshly for you. And when you would sit, you would pick out the choice cuts of meat and the best fruits and put them on your plate and put them in front of you. And his wife and he would always be the last ones to eat. Actually, I hardly ever saw them eat. Because they were so preoccupied with making sure their guests were honored that they wouldn't eat themselves. You read about generosity in books, and that's valuable. But then you experience it through a person and they define it for you. So I love this person. I love because human beings love those that love them, love those that connect with them, love those that give them. Now we come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Quran tells us something important. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. Allah is above any description, above any words that we can express about Him. But nonetheless, Allah described Himself in a way that we can relate to. So we connect with Allah's generosity by reflecting on generosity that we experience in life. Everyone see this? You see how beautiful and special this is? That Allah that is beyond anything that we've experienced described Himself in terms that we relate to. But then we said, He is not Kareem only. He is Al-Kareem. Meaning that He is more generous than any person that you've ever experienced, than the most generous person that you know. Not just this. He's more generous than all human beings combined, put together, alive, dead, future, and past. Not just this. He is more generous that can be expressed in the sum total of human language. Words cannot encompass the vastness of His generosity. No, more than this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more generous than our minds are capable of fathoming. So we imagine Allah's generosity, and that's why I specifically told you, close your eyes and imagine. So now imagine Allah's generosity to you. Imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted you your body and your life, and everything you have under your control and your possession. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, think about our food. These are just reflections about Al-Kareem, right? If I tell you, we need food to survive, but do you need cake to survive? I know that some people in the audience are shaking their heads. Yes, of course, what's life without cake, right? I think we would survive, maybe we'd have a frown on our faces, but if you had some bread or some rice and some water, some beans, some fruits and vegetables, actually the body's needs are limited. They could be satisfied through this. Allah's generosity in that we just celebrated the Eid al-Adha, the festival of the sacrifice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by His permission, He allows us to take the life of a living being, an animal, so that we can sustain our existence and we can enjoy His bounty and we can remember Him. Even the Quran says, وَإِنَّ لَكُمْ فِي الْأَنْعَامِ لَعِبْرًا. Indeed, you have in cattle a reminder and a lesson, because they are a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then you think about, meats. Everyone tastes different. I don't just mean like chicken tastes different from beef. I mean every part of the animal has a different characteristic. And fruits, colors, and types, and seasons, and the treasures of the sea. And this is just food. So what about Allah's generosity with your spouse and your children and your house and your friends and your community and your masjid and your country and your world? So when we say وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, we establish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we reflect on Him, but He's better, He's greater than we're able to encompass in our minds. This humility, my brothers and sisters, is really, really missing from the discourse about Allah in Islam and outside of Islam in our times. This is just a characteristic of our times. And that's why I really love talking about this topic, because we're products of the reality we live in. So many people today, because they want to be connected with Allah, they make Allah like us. And the Quran says this is not who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So the Quran challenges Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be described by the limitations that you and I are described by. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is not Allah if He gets hungry. So even we say subhanahu wa ta'ala, glorified be over this. If He gets tired, if He misses things, if He forgets, the Quran says Allah is not like this. And some of us, we forget. We think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like us. The Quran challenges us. It says, Subhanahu wa ta'ala amma yasifun. It says, glorified is He and high, elevated over that which they describe and ascribe to Him. But other people, by the way, they just say Allah is incredible, therefore I have no idea who He is, and I just worship Him in absence. And Islam puts us at a balance between these extremes. Allah described Himself to us so that we can know Him, but we do not know the extent of His divine greatness and excellence, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really are one of the ways that this is beautifully captured. We come back to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah has 99 names, 100 less one. Whoever ahsaha dakhal al-jannah. And I'm going to define this term now. The Arabic here has no direct English translation. Sometimes you'll see this hadith translated, whoever memorizes them enters al-jannah. But actually, the word ahsaha means more than to count something or to memorize it. Memorizing the names of Allah, by the way, is praiseworthy. It builds closeness with the names. It makes us study them. It's a good thing. And it could be part of the understanding of ahsaha. But there's actually a proof in the Holy Quran that ahsa, the word ahsa, means more than to count or memorize something. So I say this is not a sufficient translation. Anybody know the proof from the Quran of this? You want a very big hint? It was mentioned in... Someone said something? It was mentioned in Salat al-Isha. One more time. Excellent. This verse is وَإِن تَعُودُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you try to enumerate, to capture even the blessings of Allah in general, or even the depth of one blessing, you shall not be able to. There's another proof that was mentioned in Salat al-Isha. Anyone know? Sisters, do you pick up on it? It's a tricky question. Surah Maryam. Brothers, anyone pick up on it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was describing the Day of Judgment and bringing forth His creation. And Allah said, لَقَدْ أَحْصَاهُمْ وَعَدَّهُمْ عَدًّا. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings forth the creation, there's so many on the Day of Judgment, all past and present. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ أَحْصَاهُمْ, meaning that He knows each of them and their history and their secrets and their records. وَعَدَّهُمْ عَدًّا. And He counted them, meaning He knows them one by one. So the Quran describes these things as different. And that's why it's not sufficient to say who counts them or memorizes them. So ahsa, these names, means to believe in them. So we believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala epitomizes each of these names and attributes, is described by them as He named them Himself. It means also that we contemplate on them and reflect on them, each of us. This is our duty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and towards these names. So we want to move ourselves past the understanding of Allah is Al-Kareem. What does that mean? The generous, period. Okay, what does that mean? Allah is Al-Halim. I always try this exercise. We say Allah is Al-Halim. We say, what does Al-Halim mean? We say the forbearing. Okay, what does the forbearing mean? Or we read the Quran in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Who's the Beneficent? I didn't take this in English class. So now I don't understand the Arabic or the English. You made it more difficult on me. So we have to really seek understanding of these names. By the way, that seeking is a journey. It doesn't end tonight. This is a reminder. And there are many things, by the way, just while it's on the topic, many tools you can take to help you on this journey. There's some very nice books in English. One of the nice books is called Who is Allah? By Hirschfelder, Hirschfelder. Who is Allah? And it's just about a page or two on each name and a general description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's available from, I don't know if it's on Amazon or IslamicBookstore.com. If you Google it, it'll come up. Al-Ashqa has a beautiful book on the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Arabic, and it's translated in English. I believe it's called The Most Perfect Names of Allah, A-S-H-Q-A-R. Al-Ashqa, a great scholar of recent times. He passed away in the last year. And there's many others, of course, but these are a few, and I'll mention more as we go along. And online, in Arabic and Urdu, you'll find much more. In English, there's a great series on SuhaibWeb.com, an article for a number of names, and it's in progress. I believe a sister from California is writing it. SuhaibWeb.com. And I have a series on YouTube in English. I mention it because I don't know any other audio or video series in English at this time. It's called In Awe of Allah. So just other resources to help us reflect and understand some of the deeper meanings. But we also do this reflection on our own. We think, we ponder, we explore. But something very important also that we are covering tonight is that we act according to these names. These names, they shape how we behave. They shape how we conduct our lives. Some of the names, we emulate them, by the way, directly. Allah's generosity, Allah's mercy. We understand part of that generosity and mercy through our interaction with others, and we seek to be generous and merciful interacting with others. And each of Allah's names has a direct impact on our lives. Many direct impacts. So it cannot be a pure exercise in philosophy or only something we read. The names have to come off the pages into our lives. And I was sharing in our sister's discussion earlier that a mufti was asked, what is the best translation of the Quran? And he replied, the best translation of the Quran is you. When you implement the teachings of the Quran, you bring it to life. So also, one of the strongest ways to connect with Allah is to connect with the people of Allah. When you connect with those that are connected to Allah, they help you connect with Him. Even our mother, Aisha, radiallahu anha, she was asked about the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what did she say? She said his character was the Quran. In another narration, he said she was a walking Quran, a living, breathing manifestation of the Quran. And so really, none of us represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of us speak on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described as He described Himself. But we are all representatives, and we all aspire to live life according to what Allah ordained. To live a life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said is meaningful and worthwhile. So this is what I mean when I say we live according to the names. Just a fine point related to the hadith. Does Allah only have 99 names? Many people get confused about this. Actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has many names. In the language, if I can give you an example, if I say my sister has $100, does that mean that's all of her wealth? It doesn't mean that necessarily, right? It means that she has in her possession $100. We have a proof for this from the hadith, and it's actually a beautiful dua or supplication of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it shows you the humility of the Prophet ﷺ, but it also teaches us something about the names of Allah. The Prophet ﷺ says, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi kulli ismin huwa lak. Oh Allah, I beseech you and I ask you by every name that belongs to you. Then the Prophet says, Sammayta bihi nafsak. You have named yourself with it. أو علمته في كتابك. Or you taught it in your scripture, in your book. There's one more before it, I missed it. اللهم إني أسألك بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أو أنزلته في كتابك. Excuse me, I missaid it. Or you revealed it in your scripture. أو علمته أحدا من خلقك. Or you taught it to one of your creation. أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك. Or you kept hidden with you in the knowledge of the unseen with you. And then the Prophet ﷺ continued and made the dua. So you see here, he said names that he named himself with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he revealed in the scripture, that he taught to his creation, or that he kept hidden with him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has descriptions and has praises that we don't even know of till now. In fact, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the things he does on the Day of Judgment is he makes sujood at the arsh, at the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he praises Allah in ways he's never been praised before. So there's descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that just escape our experience altogether, and this is just again a reminder about humility with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I wanted to share, we shared some reflections on Al-Kareem. I wanted to share with you another name tonight, and actually this name I wouldn't say it's very well known, actually. It is in the Holy Quran though. It is the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Wadud. Al-Wadud. You know, when I ask people, I found many audiences, I asked people who have heard this name before, and the majority of the audience may not know that this was one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Wadud actually in translation means the loving. And this is one of those things that will get you a stare in the masjid. You know what I mean? You know, astaghfirullah, brother, what did you say? You said one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Wadud, the loving. This is the meaning of the word, subhanAllah. This is one of the names that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected for himself. And the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the way, are varied because our experiences and our needs for them are varied. So one reflection we have on this special name is it shows you the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our needs. We mentioned earlier that all of us need sustenance, right? We need food. Nobody can survive without food. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala named himself Ar-Razzaq, the provider. And we eat and enjoy, and actually everything we have in life is from his rizq. What else do we need in life? What else do we need in life? We need possessions. We need to have things in order to live the reality of life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala named himself Al-Kareem, the generous. And he gives us. And we love him through his giving. Or Al-Wahhab, the bestower of gifts. So that as you eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as you go to your work and get the usual, paycheck, you don't forget that every once in a while, and more often than we remember, Allah gives you an individual gift, something special. He gives you a child, He gives you a spouse. He gives you a special feeling in your heart that He didn't give your neighbor. He gave your neighbor something else. So you build that relationship with Allah, because Allah knows we need and love gifts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we need justice. And one of the challenges of our times is that injustice has become so prevalent and our world has become so connected. So now on the evening news, you can find out about anything that happened across the world. And what happens is bad news sells and travels faster than good news. So especially young people growing up in the internet age, they develop a pessimistic outlook on life. Because the person feeding the homeless, the person helping the young people in the MSA, the person engaging in positive things, they don't make the 6 o'clock news. But the murderer and the thief and the tyrannical dictator, they dominate the 6 o'clock news. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls himself Al-Adl, the utterly and absolutely just. So that we can take it upon ourselves to establish justice and deal justly in our dealings in this life, but also to recognize and to fear a day where every human being is brought to account before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah will exact justice for those that were not able to have it in this life. And Allah will question us for our place in establishing justice in our circles and our lives. I mention this because this tells us something beautiful about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name Al-Wadud. It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognized our need to be loved and granted us a name to connect with Him through that emotion and that need. The Islamic Sharia and the system of rules and law and the religion overall is very practical. Islam does not ask us to do that which is superhuman. Islam does not put us in unreasonable situations and then ask us why we did not perform. So this is something beautiful we learn through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. Allah recognizes our humanity and our weakness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us names to connect with Him on varied channels based on our human experience and our needs. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love is not like our love. Actually, I'm going to share with you a very fine point in the language. What's the more popular word for love in the language? Anyone here speak Urdu? What's the Urdu word for love? Muhabbat, right? Or any Arabic speakers in the audience? What's the popular Arabic word for love? Al-Ishq is one of them, and Al-Hubb is the one I'm looking for. Al-Hubb. So actually, one of the names of one who shows love it comes from the same root in both languages, is Al-Habib. It's the noun version of it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not name himself Al-Habib. He named himself Al-Wadud. And the scholars have beautiful descriptions of why. This is one of the incredible things about the Holy Quran, by the way. There's not an extra letter in the Quran. There's not an accidental word. There's no two words that are synonymous and identical in meaning. Every differentiation in vocabulary is indicative of a difference in meaning. And if the Quran was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could not analyze it in this way. Because every author and every book that is reasonable starts with an apology for the errors that will be found one day, and publishes errata and mistakes as human knowledge continues to develop. But the Quran starts, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is the book in which there is no doubt, a guide for those who have taqwa, those who have God consciousness. So the Quran actually speaks from a point of view of confidence. It challenges us to analyze in this way, and that's why the speech is not just to Muslims. I speak on college campuses to audiences that have many atheists, many people who don't believe in Allah. And I share the same verse in the same way. Because it is a challenge to read the Quran with that level of scrutiny and depth and explore it. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say Al-Wadud and not Al-Habib? By the way, we're not saying why like we know better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or why that we're questioning Allah. We're asking why so we can try to perceive part of the divine wisdom behind this. Anybody know? Anybody have any thoughts? Perhaps why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected Al-Wadud? The scholars actually say, sorry, say something?
I was going to attempt to say that maybe you were speaking of love is conditional. You were speaking of the love of Allah is really unconditional towards His creation.
Excellent. And the brother shared, perhaps it is conditional. And actually, this is a part of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Wadud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a general wood or love that He shows to all creation. Even those that reject Him, even those that don't believe in Him, even those that disobey Him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a special wood, and we'll talk about it, it's in the Holy Quran, that He shows especially for His righteous servants. So this is certainly part of the name of Allah Al-Wadud. What else? Anybody have a thought? What could be some of the special attributes of this name? Sisters, anyone want to share? I know it's a difficult question. I ask difficult questions, I'm sorry, I'm a difficult person. But just a thought, maybe why something that could be special about the name of Allah. Yes? Jazakumullah khairan, beautiful. And this is indeed part of the name of Allah Al-Wadud, that His love is at a different level that human beings cannot reach. His love is greater than human love. Actually, there is a specific human relationship that is the closest thing we have to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the closest human relationship to unconditional love. And by the way, there's a lot you can learn from this relationship about the relationship between Allah and His servant. Anybody know? Which human relationship? The love of parents and especially of the mother to her child. The closest thing we have to unconditional love is this. And Allah's relationship to His servant, the love is higher and greater than this. In fact, there's a beautiful story of the Prophet ﷺ. And they were in the desert, and a child, a young infant child, had become separated from his mother. And the child was wailing and uncomfortable, and the Prophet ﷺ and his companions watched as the mother searched for that child and eventually found them. And the child was screaming and crying and uncomfortable. So the mother picked up the child. And she comforted and calmed the child and started to nurse the child until it calmed down. So the Prophet ﷺ asked his companions, do you see what I see? Do you see this incredible situation? They were all moved by it. So the Prophet ﷺ asked, could you imagine this mother flinging her baby into the fire after this? The companions said, no, O Messenger of Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah is more merciful with you than she to her infant child. So Allah connected us with the love, His love, through the love of the parent and specifically the love of the mother to the child. The closest thing, right? I mean, think about it. You might mind if I get a little informal for a moment, but we have a child, and the child is so helpless that they cannot feed themselves. And then you have a parent that sits there, and if the child doesn't eat, they're going to die. And the parent's willing to feed them, but the kid doesn't feel like eating. And the parent, for their own well-being, has to be patient and try a spoon, and the kid spits it out, and then try again. And I see all the parents smiling, because they understand for that child's well-being they have to eat, and they get it. After that, how does the child thank their parents? They let it all up. Or they leave them a special delivery in the diaper. Right? And then the parents, subhanAllah, what other human being would put up with this? What other human being would put up with this thanks for all that patience? But the parent, they clean them, they clean their clothes, they change them, they make them comfortable, they calm them when they're crying. And really all the parent might be looking for at the end is a smile and the comfort of their child. Because the child literally lacks capacity to really benefit the parent other than emotionally at that age. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the closest thing we have. Allah, our worship does not have the capacity to benefit. Our disobedience does not have the capacity to harm Him. When He commands us to do something, His dominion doesn't increase when we do it, and it doesn't decrease when we don't do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, each of us, we're patient with each other the first time we trip up, the second time. How many of us have done the same sin 100 times? How many of us have slept through Fajr for 10 years? How many of us haven't been cautious for zakat for a long period of our life? How many of us have a parent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to be good to them and we don't look after them? How many of us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusted us by being the custodians of the masjid and we push people away instead of bringing them closer? All of these things, human beings don't have patience for this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extends us chance and chance again. By the way, Al-Ashqar mentions in his book that this is one of the meanings of Al-Wadud. That if it were not for Allah's great love for us, He would not extend opportunity after opportunity as we rejected those opportunities after it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us chances, gives us life, gives us a chance to turn back to tawbah. And this is from His love subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another meaning of Al-Wadud is some people harbor love, but it is only at the level of feelings. It's never implemented. And some people love and they act on that love. So if I tell my mother, if we're living in the same house, and I tell my mother, I love you, Hubb can be defined as feelings that you feel in your heart, emotions. And would can be feelings followed up by actions. So if I tell my mother, I love you, and I stop there, is this Hubb or would? At this level, it's Hubb. If she asks me then to take out the trash, and I hate taking out the trash, and I don't. If she asks for my company and I tell her, I'm sorry, I've planned this whole night, and I leave her waiting up for me, have I established that I have would or that I have hope? I've established hope. I didn't act on my life. But when you sacrifice, when you give based on what the one that you love loves to receive, that's hope or would. By the way, every married person here, actually, it's like the most common verse recited in weddings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Rum, chapter number 30, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. And from His signs is that He created from you mates or spouses. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you may find comfort and repose in them. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ, And He made between you two things. Hope or mawadda. He made mawaddatan wa rahmah. Mawadda is another linguistic form meaning al-wood. So He made love that is acted upon. Because, you know, the stereotypical story, I'm sorry, we have to be real, right? But the stereotypical love story in our culture is what? Romeo and Juliet, right? Romeo and Juliet are the definition of hope. They are people, and I say this deliberately, they are people that loved and never did what it took to act upon that love. They never raised children. They never were able to act upon their marriage. And most of that play, they're not married. Most of that play, they're wishful thinkers. That is not the highest form of love. But al-wud is one that is acted on. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us, and His actions to us are demonstrative of that love. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love is the epitome and the highest form of love. We'll close, inshallah, and open up for thoughts and questions and reflections. But we'll just close by coming back to my brother's point about a special love. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a general wood for all creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you disobey Him, He doesn't stop giving you water. He doesn't stop feeding you. He doesn't stop extending to you chances. So there's a general thing that goes to all people. And this is in the Quran, Surah Al-Buruj, which many of you may have memorized, وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ. And in another part, إِنَّ رَبِّي رَحِيمٌ وَدُودٌ. In the two verses, indeed, my Lord, first, and He is the forgiving, the loving, and in the other verse, indeed, my Lord is merciful, loving. These can be general, but then there is another verse that speaks about a special class of love. This love is not given to everyone. This love is given to a very specific class of people. And this love, you cannot inherit the right to have this love. You have to act in a way that is worthy of having this love. This love can only be gotten through action, not through inheritance. It's in the Holy Quran. It's actually was recited in Salat al-Isha. It's in the very third to last verse of Surah Maryam, chapter number 19. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَيَجْعَلُ لَهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ وُدًّا. Indeed, those that believe and do righteous deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make for these people a special love, a special wood just for them. And I know this is the love and the relationship that all of us are longing for, are desiring. This one, the only way you can get it is to be from those that build that iman and work righteous deeds. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you things that He doesn't give others. I don't mean material possessions. I mean balance, tranquility, peace, an honorable station in this life and hereafter. An ability to know where you're from, why you're here, and where you're going. An ability to deal with the bitter moments in life in the same way that you can deal with its sweet moments. The ability to be a righteous person of limited means and to be a righteous person who's extremely rich. The ability to hold the dunya in your hand and not have it consume your heart. But more than that, the ability to read the Quran and not read it like a book, read it like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to you. The ability for prayer to not just be a series of exercises, but a reconnection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these things, those things are not given to everyone. Everyone gets food and water and, the access to, some level of companionship and friendship. These things everybody gets. But this special class, you have to be in that group to get it. You have to want it and desire it. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَيَجْعَلُ لَهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ وُدًّا. So I want to close, as we move into our discussion, Q&A and reflection session. I want to close by reminding you, the topic is greater than we can cover in a few moments. But one of the biggest traps that Shaitan gives us is we look at a person that we think is connected with Allah, or we think about the prophets, or we think about the mothers of the believers, and then we dismiss their example. We dismiss it because we say that's the prophet. I can't handle that. That's Prophet Ibrahim. Who am I? That's Sayyidah Aisha. Who am I to emulate that? When we do that, we miss actually emulating the very actions that got them into that special status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because no one connects with Allah by accident. No one connects with Allah by wishful thinking. No one connects with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by just harboring emotion. But connecting with Allah requires investment. Requires knowing Allah. How do you connect with someone that you don't know? And then when you know Him, you have to act on that knowledge. You have to work. You have to invest. You have to push up the blankets and get up off the warmth of the pillow in Fajr. You have to give of the money that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put love in our hearts of. You have to struggle. As the Prophet ﷺ says, the strong person is not just a person with tons of ability. The strong person is the one who controls themselves in a fit of anger. We have to work to smile in the faces of our brothers and sisters, to discipline our character. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is special. No one truly comes to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that they love Him. You see, other human beings aren't like that. You can get to know a person, actually celebrities, they deliberately hide parts of themselves so you can keep them in that aura. Because if you know some of their human facility, they fall in your eyes. Allah's not like that. No one knows Allah except that they love Him. And no one truly loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that they act on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and invest in that relationship and give and worship and sacrifice. And no one invests in their relationship with Allah except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them with more love and more knowing of Allah. And so I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those that invest in our relationship with Him, and make us from those that come to know Him and live with His divine names, and to make us from those that meet Him in honorable meeting on the Day of Judgment in the companionship of the prophets and the righteous before us. I open the floor, inshallah, for your thoughts and questions and reflections on things that we discussed.
So you talked about the two different sorry?
So
you talked about the two different words for love, the wud and ahub. Are there any places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the other form instead of wud, ahub, and in what context does He use that love?
Everybody hear the question or not? Sisters, do you hear the question? The question was, in summary, we spoke about the difference between wud and hub. The two forms of descriptions of love, or two of them in the Arabic language. Are there places in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses al-hub as a description? We spoke about the use of al-wud. As a description of Himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose as the name al-wadud, and it's not one of His names al-habib. But the word al-hub is used in the Holy Quran. And it is used actually in relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. For example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَندَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُم كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. That Allah says, from amongst people are those that take equals, that take others, they love them as much as they love Allah. So some people, we talk about idols of wood and stone, but some people in our time, their idol is Wall Street. They love Allah, they love Wall Street or their money as much or more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so money becomes the master of that person. Some people hunt after the natural desire that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed in all of us for companionship and love with the opposite gender. This is natural, this is human. But when that love becomes greater than the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it owns us. So the Quran says some people, they make others equal or even in their minds greater than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. As for those that believe, they love Allah more than anything else, even if they love other things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that relationship with Him organizes the rest of their lives. There's other uses of this word, so it can be, certainly al-hubb is part of the relationship between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in both ways, but when Allah described Himself, He chose the word that described the highest and purest form of love, and that is al-wajh subhanahu wa ta'ala. Great question. Yes?
I have two questions after that, very quickly. Were the names of Allah listed in any hadith?
What are the names of Allah?
Was there any hadith that listed the 99 names of Allah?
There is a narration of, the question was, is there any hadith that lists the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sometimes you'll see the hadith that I mentioned earlier, that Allah has 99 names, 100 less 1. You'll see it narrated with a list of 99 names afterwards. The authenticity of the first part of the hadith is authentic. The list of 99 names is weak. It's not a strong narration. So we don't have any strongly authenticated narration where the 99 are all listed together. However, we have in the Quran, many names. We have in the authentic ahadith many names. And so the scholars have researched the body of narration that we have and compiled lists of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are minor differences, between what their selection of the 99 are, but they're all names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're all, as long as it's mentioned in an authentic narration.
I think the second part you sort of touched on it is, somewhere I heard that back in 2005 or 2006, the Al-Azhar did some recommendation by some scholars from Saudi Arabia, but they suggested a new listing of names, not a complete listing, but few names were either introduced or removed by few names. And Al-Azhar had approved it. I'm not really sure if you're aware of this or not.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular list. It's intriguing, actually. Inshallah, research it. I've never heard of it before, or we can correspond, inshallah, afterwards. I'd be really curious to know it. But certainly, hadith sciences have been revolutionized by, or rejuvenated, I should say, by information technology. And so the ability now to authenticate a hadith is, we have new abilities that weren't there for prior generations just through the advance of knowledge. So certainly, it's a healthy discussion among the scholars. But again, most of the list is common amongst all of them. So there's 30-some names in the Holy Quran, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and Wadud. These are names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's ones in Ahadith. Some of the end of the list, if you will, you'll see minor differences. And again, this is just indicative of the fact that Allah has more than 100 names. Allah's hadith, this hadith doesn't mean that He has only 99. But this is a wonderful discussion that the scholars have. And certainly if this list is in existence, it would be a great resource. The books I mentioned earlier also, Who is Allah, the names of Allah, each of these have either a subset of the names or 99 or even more that they discuss at some length. Great questions. Sisters, do you have any thoughts, reflections, questions?
What is the difference between names and attributes, like asma and sifat?
No. This is a delicate point. I could, some of the references I mentioned, discuss it in more detail. But actually, at the most basic level, they're completing one another. So the names, I mentioned the example of Kareem earlier. So the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Kareem, Ar-Rahim, are all descriptive of His attributes. And this level is sufficient for most of them. Inshallah, if you'd like offline, inshallah, we can go into some of the more nuanced issues. Inshallah. But at a basic level, they're merely synonymous. They complete one another. Other thoughts?
Question. Relating to the name, the hidden name of Allah. Well, obviously, there are a lot of names that we don't know. But there is one that most of people actually usually say that it's the hidden name of Allah. And I just want to know what you think about it. And many people say it's Allah Himself in that name. So is that something you also think it's... Because even in, I'll give you also an example. There is, I think, a hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where I think she talked to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ya Aisha, there is a name of Allah. If I give you that name, anything you ask Allah, Allah will give you. And then, of course, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not give him that name. But he said, Aisha radiallahu anha repeated. He said, Allahumma inni ad'uka Allah. وأدعوك الرحمن وأدعوك البراء الرحيم أدعوك بأسمائك الحسنى كلها ما علمت منها وما لم أعلم أن تغفر لي وترحمني. And the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, yes, the name is in that. So Allah, of course, was in that hadith. So do you think Allah also is something of that, or
no? Okay, the question is about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about an Ism al-Azam, the greatest or kind of encompassing name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it has a special significance in that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Aisha that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called upon by this name, that He, in summary, He doesn't repel the call. When He's called about it, He gives and He answers the prayer. There is great research about this. I think it's a very interesting topic. One of the nicest kind of summaries I've seen is by Dr. Tariq Suwaidan. He has a whole extended discussion about an Ism al-Azam. It's very accessible. It's online in audio. He speaks English, but I don't think that work has been translated. And he cites a really nice recent book, actually. The name is escaping me right now, but it's a very nice research paper that brings a whole new perspective to the discussion. In summary, certainly this Ism al-Azam, a lot of times actually you see in the Sirah, the Prophet ﷺ, like a great example is the night of Laylatul Qadr, right? The Prophet ﷺ gave us many special designations for this night and lots of rewards, but He didn't tell us which night on the last 10 nights it is. Part of the blessing of this is that you knock on all those nights, you seek, and you search for it, so you get more reward than if you just focused on that night. Also, similarly, scholars comment that it's a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept the definitive answer on this name hidden from us, so that we call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by all of His names, not just by focusing on one. So some scholars say that it could be the name of Allah, that's one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. Some say it's Ar-Rahman, some make other suggestions, and some, and this recent work I believe is one of them, suggests that actually it's an encouragement to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by all His names. And, by doing this, by the way, not only do we connect with Allah through His names, but we connect with our needs. It brings us closer home. Two parents that have been, a husband and a wife that have been married for some time and are searching for that child, right? And they really appreciate this blessing now because you're struggling to find it. You can say, oh Allah, give me a child. That's wonderful. And you can find a new sincerity in saying, oh Allah, Al-Wahhab, the giver of gifts, grant me. Because you really need that attribute. You're feeling it in that moment. Allah's Al-Wahhab all the time. But our experience varies. You see what I'm saying? So it's beautiful. If you want something of mercy, ask Allah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. If you want His generosity, ask Al-Kareem. If you want, His justice, and you're not getting it right, ask Allah Al-Adl to support you, and to support you in establishing justice, and so on with all the names of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So this is one of the really beautiful parts of an Ismul Azam, is that it's a gateway to asking Allah through all of His names, and also through His name, Allah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And inshallah, those references you may find very enjoyable for more discussion. I'll come back just 1 second. I'm going to give the sisters an opportunity, and then we have another question here. I want to make sure that we're giving you a chance to share your reflections, your questions, your thoughts. See, they're all private questions there. I see them. They're hopping. It's hopping from one sister to another, but we want it to come over here, inshallah. We want to benefit from it. Yes. We're speaking about salah and dua in general, that we feel talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are some tips to feel that connection with Allah? I think one of the biggest tips is to personalize your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, I love the story of a companion that came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, I'm not able to make, he called it the dandana, which actually in language means the da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what it means in language, right? So he's saying, I hear you and Mu'adh say all this poetic stuff in dua, and to me, I can't say it. He's saying it's like da-da-da-da-da to me. I'm not able to repeat it. So he called it ad-dandana in Arabic language. So he said, I'm not able to make dua in this way that you and Mu'adh are. The Prophet ﷺ replied, so what do you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with? He said, I ask Him for Jannah, and I ask Him to save me from hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ said something beautiful. He said, Mu'adh and I, we circle this with our statement. He said, this is all we're saying, all of our poetic dua, all that beautiful thing, we're just going around these, we're not saying more than this. So he encouraged that man not to be intimidated to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through an ability to be poetic. So I know, we hear that beautiful dua in Ramadan, or you hear the Imam make it, or you hear Haram, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm not qualified to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be personal but respectful. So one thing I always encourage people to do is to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your language. There's no difference of opinion about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands all languages, and you can make dua in your language. And you don't have to be formal. You can say, Allah, I am struggling with such and such, please help me, and I need this. And this is informal but respectful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can be informal but respectful. In salah and outside of salah. And when you personalize your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it really helps you to connect with Him. You see what I'm saying? When it's always by proxy, when it's distant, when you're just repeating what you memorized, only then it puts a little distance between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It takes a little bit of that feeling away from you. So I recommend that personalize your relationship with Allah. Something else that's really nice, by the way, and we learned this from one of the great women in the Holy Quran, and that is the mother of Maryam. Not all speech to Allah has to be a request for something. In other words, usually when we say dua, we say, oh Allah, you know, we're asking for something, we want something. But we can raise our hands and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or we can raise our hand and make what's called al-munajat. It's literally a discussion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, in our language, I would call it venting but respectful. Venting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-munajat in our language. It's speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you don't have a specific outcome or you don't even know which way to go. So, in Surah Al-Imran, chapter number 3, the mother of Maryam, she's imagining, she gifted her unborn child to the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the temple. And in her mind, that was always synonymous with having a boy, because she couldn't imagine how a girl would be able to implement these things. When she gave birth to a young girl. She gave birth to Maryam. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا وَضَعَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that she was going to be given birth to a girl. But at that moment, the mother of Maryam doesn't know the wisdom behind this. So she speaks to Allah without a specific dua in the beginning. She's saying, رَبِّ إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لَكَ مَا فِي بَطْنِي مُحَرَّرًا فَتَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. When she hasn't given birth, she's saying, my Lord, I have given you this unborn child sincerely for you, so accept from me. You are all hearing, you are all knowing. So when she gives birth, and of course, in Islam, giving birth to a child, girl is an honor, not the opposite. But she, as a human being, is shocked in that moment. فَلَمَّا وَضَعَتْهَا قَالَتْ رَبِّ إِنِّي وَضَعْتُهَا أُنْثَى. She said, oh my Lord, I have given birth to a girl. وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا وَضَعَتْ وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. And Allah knows what she gave birth to, and the male child is not like the female child. There's difference. وَإِنِّي سَمَّيْتُهَا مَرْيَمَ. The first one she shared the name with is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She didn't ask for anything. She said, I've named her Maryam. And then at the very end, وَإِنِّي أُعِيدُهَا بِكَ وَذُرِّيَّتَهَا مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. At the end, she made a dua. She sought refuge for her and her children and her progeny from a shaitan. This is really nice to just lay on your bed and speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even, just say, I'm struggling with this. I don't know what's going on. And trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show you the way. All of this personalization, we mentioned venting to Allah or al-munajat, we mentioned ad-du'a, and we mentioned praising Him, builds an individual relationship with Allah. We have maybe time for one or two more. I'll come back to Omar and then I'll swing back to the sisters for our last chance.
So that was my question.
Oh,
But I have another question.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit more trivial. It's relating back to what we were talking about earlier. I received a book from a relative, and it outlined each page. There was a name of Allah, and underneath the name it said, if you would like so-and-so to happen, recite this name 100 times or 1,000 times. Is there any wisdom behind that? I know you were talking if you want something special, you would ask Allah by a specific name, but is there any wisdom behind saying, I need to recite this name 147 times to get this thing?
Great question. The question was, sometimes in books we'll see the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then say a prescription, say reciting a name or so many times has some special, gift or some fadl with it, something that you get as a result of that. In a dua, we can make any dua we want. But if a dua is connected with a specific outcome, that specific text, a text from the Quran or a text from Hadith, to give special status to a text, we have to authenticate it. So if it's in the Quran, there's a lot of dua in the Quran. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً qina adabana. All of these dua are beautiful and they're authenticated from the Quran. In the hadith, there are special dua or special dhikr or remembrance we can make that have a special status. And the scholars are some scholars are more relaxed in their criteria for authenticity when it comes to doing good things, fada'il al-a'mal. Okay? So when you read a book like that, usually the books don't have the authentication of the text. But if it's something that you're going to really encompass, it's going to be difficult, and you really want that specific outcome with that text, I would encourage you to authenticate the text to make sure, before you make big sacrifices, that it comes with that and it's well authenticated. I say that because the scholars were relaxed with fada'il al-a'mal because people were doing lots of good deeds anyway. You see what I'm saying? So like, read this surah and that surah and this dhikr and so on. Now, we live in a different reality. Some people will focus on saying, that thing 100 times and they didn't pray Fajr. This is flipping priorities. You see what I'm saying? And so always put higher priority on the things that are obligatory and well authenticated. So I don't know this particular book, of course. I'm sure the book has a lot of good. But by the way, sometimes people write books and they write a text thinking it's authentic, and it becomes apparent only after, especially the older books. So especially in making dua, I encourage you to find, if you're going to use specific text, find a well-authenticated one, or if you're interested in a specific one, there's great website, sunnah.com in English, S-U-N-N-A, I think there's an H.com, is a great hadith search tool, and you can search there. In Arabic, hadith.durar.net, D-O-R-A-R, it's a great Arabic hadith search tool, and you can very quickly authenticate text or ask support from someone in the community that's used to doing research. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Last question, inshallah. Give the sisters the first shot. Sister, you have something? Or? No? Can I do auction rules? Would that be fair? Going once? Going twice? Okay, any brother want to close us off with that question? I know, subhanAllah, I hope I didn't tire you out. I love the topic, and I hope I didn't take too long from your time, inshallah. If there's one last question, yes.
What are some good ways to, avoid shirk?
Avoid shirk. Shirk. Check them out here. Great question. Beautiful. What's your name?
Tamim?
Tamim. Great question, Tamim. So the question was, what are some good ways to avoid shirk or associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We were mentioning earlier that verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, that some people in their minds, they make equals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's when we start sacrificing our values. We start sacrificing our worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, Shaitan is really smart, by the way. Shaitan knows if he comes to us and he says, do this bad thing, make shirk, or do this horrible sin, you'd be like, what's up, man? Crazy, I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to be a good Muslim, right? Because we don't do it. So Shaitan plays a trick on us. It's never like that. He links wrongdoing with something that we desire. Something that looks cool. Something that looks interesting. Okay? And that's how, the minor things happen when we start sacrificing on a smaller thing, all the way up to the big forms of shirk when we forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or equaling others with. Nobody starts drinking bad drinks or alcohol alone. First they have to see the commercials and then feel like the cool people are doing it. And then I'm going to go hang out with these people on Friday, and then I'm with them. See what I'm saying? Nobody starts lying by getting up and taking a microphone, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, and say some horrible lie. That's a terrible person. But we start by cheating on the test. That one question, because I was struggling. And then we start saying just a little thing to our parents. And then the little things come big things. So also with shirk, minor and big, it starts with the little things and builds up. So the way we guard ourselves is by building our love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so it's bigger than anything. And again, you can't love Allah if you don't know Him. You can't love Allah if you don't invest. So you keep investing until it's bigger than everything else that our hearts naturally love. We love to be popular, we love to be loved, we love to have money, we love to be comfortable, we love other people. But none of those at the expense of our love of Allah. None of those more than our love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they clash, we obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing the right thing. So we keep pumping up our love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we watch ourselves in the minor things. Again, one of the big tools you use in doing this is to build good company. One of the best ways to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to find those that seek Him and do what they do. That's why Ramadan is so easy, right? Ramadan is so easy because everybody's doing the right thing. It's like, whenever you do like an extra fast, you're like, I think I'll fast today. And then at 8 a.m. it's like, oh, I'm so hungry. And then you're like, okay, I can get through the water, but the sip. That difficulty is because you feel like you're alone. But Ramadan, subhanAllah, the first day is difficult, then it's so easy. So salah is easy when you pray with the people that are praying. Doing the right thing is easier when you keep good questions. So build up your relationship with Allah. Watch yourselves in the minor things. You'll avoid the big things. And keep good company. This will just be a couple of points. Great question. I mean, for sharing this. Inshallah, we'll close with dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the people of the Quran, the people that are His people and especially chosen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who ahsa His names and who enter Al-Jannah by this great hadith. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those that believe in His names and believe in Him, to increase our love of Him and to increase our submission to Him. We ask Allah to make us from those that contemplate and reflect upon His signs, to make us from those that act upon what He taught, to make us from those that live in the Quran, to make us die in a state of Islam, to make us die in a state of righteousness, to protect our spouses and our children and our parents and our community and all people across the world, to guide us to Islam. Oh Allah, we ask You for guidance. Allahumma hdina fi man hadayt, Allahumma afina fi man afayt, wa tawallana fi man tawallayt, wa barik lana fi ma a'tayt. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم آمين آمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And before we close, inshallah, just give a chance for anyone to make announcements for the masjid.